October 28, 1940, a cold morning in Athens. At 3 a.m., the Italian ambassador delivers Mussolini's ultimatum: surrender your sovereignty or face invasion. Prime Minister Ioannis Metaxas listens, silent, then gives a single word that will echo through history: Ochi, number. Within hours, Italian troops surge across the Albanian border, and a small divided nation finds itself standing alone against a fascist empire. Dreams of empire. Imagine the Mediterranean in 1940. Calm blue waters that Mussolini believed should be his empire's private sea. For years, he dreamed of resurrecting a new Rome, one that would stretch across Africa and into the Balkans. Ethiopia had fallen to his troops in 1936, and Albania was annexed in 1939. But these victories, hollow and brutal, gave him only a taste of conquest. Now, his eyes turned to Greece. Why Greece? For Mussolini, it was not just about territory, it was about prestige, about showing the world and his German ally that Italy was a true power. Hitler had conquered Poland and France. Mussolini feared Italy would forever be the junior partner unless he acted. He wanted a quick, dazzling victory. Greece, small and seemingly divided, looked like the perfect target. But beneath this arrogance lay insecurity. Italy's military was ill-prepared. Its soldiers were brave, yes, but poorly equipped, poorly supplied, and trapped in a command system rife with rivalries and delusion. Mussolini ignored the warnings of his generals. To him, Greece would be nothing more than a stroll to Athens. Yet Greece was not the weakling he imagined. A proud nation with a long history of defiance, still haunted by wounds from its wars with Turkey, still fractured by political chaos, yet bound together by something Mussolini could not calculate: the determination to remain free. So the stage was set. An empire builder eager to prove himself, and a small nation unwilling to bow. What followed would not be the swift triumph Mussolini promised, but one of the most humiliating defeats his regime would ever endure. A nation in crisis. Before the first Italian soldier crossed the border, Greece was already a country on edge. The 1920s and 30s had been decades of turmoil: coups, counter-coups, monarchists versus republicans, and the constant shadow of civil unrest. When Greece lost its war against Turkey in 1922, over 1 million refugees flooded in from Asia Minor, straining an already fragile society. By 1935, the monarchy was restored with British backing, but the divisions did not disappear. King George II looked out over a fractured political landscape and saw instability everywhere. His solution came in the form of Ioannis Metaxas, a former general who promised order. In 1936, Metaxas suspended parliament, banned political parties, and established a dictatorship. His rule was harsh, yet his propaganda machine was effective. He played upon Greek pride, history, and fear of communism. To many, he was a strong hand in chaotic times. To others, he was a tyrant. But when war loomed, Metaxas became the face of national defiance. The irony was that Italy believed these divisions would paralyze Greece. They expected a divided population too weak to resist. But instead, Mussolini's threat would do the opposite. When the ultimatum came, Greeks of every faction, monarchist, republican, communist, and even those who despised Metaxas, united under one banner. It was no longer about politics. It was about survival, about dignity, about whether Greece would bow or stand. And in the early hours of October 28, 1940, the question was answered with a single word: Ochi Day. It was just after 3 in the morning in Athens when the Italian ambassador arrived at Prime Minister Ioannis Metaxas's home. He carried Mussolini's ultimatum: allow Italian troops to occupy strategic positions in Greece or face war. Metaxas read it silently. He understood exactly what it meant: occupation, humiliation, the end of Greek sovereignty. When he finally looked up, he gave his answer not in speeches, not in drawn-out debate, but in a single word that captured the spirit of his nation: Ochi, number. Within hours, that refusal became legend. Crowds poured into the streets of Athens shouting, Ochi, Ochi. Bells rang out, strangers embraced. For once, a fractured country spoke with one voice. At dawn, Mussolini's forces crossed from Albania into northwestern Greece. Some 140,000 Italian soldiers marched through the Pindus Mountains, confident they faced only a token resistance. They had tanks, planes, and superior numbers. Against them stood fewer than 40,000 Greeks, outnumbered, outgunned. yet unyielding. The first shots echoed through the mountains, where rain turned to sleet and sleet to snow. The Italians expected a quick collapse. Instead, they ran headfirst into the stubborn defenses of General Charalambos Katsimitros's 8th Division. Soldiers dug into rocky hillsides, manned ancient artillery, and refused to give ground. In those opening days, the war was more than strategy. It was a test of spirit, and Greece had spirit to spare. Mountains of fire. The Italians believed their tanks and aircraft would tear through the Greek defenses, but the Pindus Mountains had other plans. Jagged peaks, narrow valleys, and relentless rain turned the invasion into a nightmare. Tanks bogged down in mud, trucks slid off frozen roads, soldiers shivered in thin uniforms, unprepared for the bitter Balkan winter. For the Greeks, this harsh landscape was an ally. Villagers guided soldiers along hidden paths. Women carried ammunition on their backs, trudging through snow to resupply the front. Entire communities became part of the war effort. It wasn't just an army resisting, it was a people. At Kalpaki, the Italians launched wave after wave against the Alaya-Kalamas line. Artillery thundered, bombers screamed overhead, and still the Greek defenders held. Katsimitros had made a bold choice. Instead of retreating deeper into Greece, he anchored his men here, gambling that their courage and the terrain would break the enemy. And it worked. Italian divisions slammed into well-dug positions, their attacks shattered by stubborn resistance. By early November, what Mussolini had promised would be a lightning campaign had slowed to a bloody crawl. But the true test came in the Pindus sector. There, elite Italian Alpini troops advanced toward the Metsovo Pass, hoping to split Greece in two. For days, Colonel Konstantinos Davakis and his outnumbered men fought desperately to hold them off. When Davakis was gravely wounded, reinforcements rushed in, and the battle turned. The Italians were thrown back, their offensive in shambles. What was supposed to be a swift conquest was now a grueling stalemate in the snow. And for the first time, Mussolini faced the possibility of humiliation. The Greek counterattack. By mid-November 1940, the Italian advance had stalled. Supply lines were collapsing, morale was faltering, and Mussolini's army, once so confident, found itself bogged down in the frozen mountains. For the Greeks, it was the moment to strike back. On November 14th, General Alexandros Papagos launched a bold counteroffensive. With fresh divisions rushing to the front, the Greeks surged forward across the border into Albania. What had begun as a desperate defense now became a stunning reversal of fortune. Imagine the shock of Italian soldiers who just weeks earlier had been promised a parade through Athens, now retreating in chaos, abandoning supplies and artillery as Greeks pressed relentlessly behind them. Villages that had once seen the invaders march in now watched them flee. In battle after battle, Greek troops clawed their way through blizzards and mountain passes, driving the Italians back more than 50 kilometers into Albanian territory. At Korçë, they captured a vital city, cutting deep into Mussolini's campaign. In Epirus, entire Italian divisions were thrown into disarray, their lines shattered by coordinated Greek assaults. But it wasn't just the army that pushed forward. Civilians once again played their part. Farmers turned oxen into makeshift transport. Women trudged through snow with baskets of food and bandages. Priests blessed soldiers before they charged, reminding them of the stakes: their land, their freedom, their families. Across Europe, headlines spread the news. Tiny Greece was humiliating fascist Italy. For Mussolini, it was an embarrassment he could not bear. For Hitler, it was a dangerous distraction. And for Greece, it was proof that courage and unity could defy even the strongest of enemies. Winter closed its fist around the Balkans. Snowdrifts swallowed roads. Icy winds tore across mountain ridges, and the temperature dropped so low that rifles froze in soldiers' hands. In this frozen hell, the war became less about bullets and more about endurance. For the Italians, conditions were catastrophic. Pack animals collapsed from frostbite. Men shivered in thin uniforms, their boots worn through, their rations dwindling. But the Greeks suffered too. Ammunition was scarce, artillery outdated, and reinforcements marched with shoes falling apart. Yet still, they fought on. The Battle of Hill 731 became the very symbol of this struggle. For days, Italian forces hurled themselves at a single Greek battalion guarding a strategic pass. Wave after wave, backed by tanks tanks and artillery smashed into the defenders, and every time the Greeks threw them back. Trenches filled with mud, snow, and blood, yet the line held. Some called it a modern Thermopylae, but the heroes were not only soldiers. In villages near the front, old men carried rifles from wars long past. Mothers and daughters formed human chains, hauling crates of ammunition up treacherous slopes. Entire communities fed and sheltered weary troops. In this war, the line between army and people blurred until Greece itself became the defender. These sacrifices came at a heavy cost. Thousands froze, thousands more fell in battle. Letters home spoke of hunger, of frostbite, of the fear of never seeing spring. Yet even in the darkest moments there was pride. Pride in defiance, pride in unity, pride in the simple word that had started it all, Oci. This was no longer just a war for territory. It was a war of spirit, and for Italy, it was becoming a war of humiliation. By the winter of 1940, Mussolini's grand gamble had collapsed into disaster. What was supposed to be a swift conquest had become a humiliating retreat. Italian soldiers, promised glory, now huddled in frozen trenches, demoralized and undersupplied. Their generals argued bitterly, each blaming the other. The problems ran deep. Italy's supply lines were choked by the mountains and snow. Ammunition was rationed, fuel ran dry, and reinforcements trickled in too slowly to make a difference. Coordination between the army, navy, and air force was non-existent. Rivalries paralyzed strategy, while Mussolini refused to acknowledge reality. Meanwhile, across Europe, the world watched in astonishment. Tiny Greece, a nation divided and underarmed, had humbled one of Europe's so-called great powers. Headlines celebrated the defiance. Greeks hurl back the invaders. Mussolini stalled in the mountains. Even Churchill declared, "Hence we will not say that Greeks fight like heroes, but that heroes fight like Greeks." The humiliation stung Mussolini personally. He had hoped Greece would be his moment of triumph, proof that Italy could stand alongside Nazi Germany as an equal. Instead, it exposed the weakness of his regime. Far from being Hitler's partner, Italy was revealed to be a liability. Desperate to save face, Mussolini ordered reckless offensives, throwing men into assaults that ended only in more bloodshed and failure. The spring offensive of 1941 was the most catastrophic of all, ending at Hill 731, where exhausted Greek defenders once again broke the Italian attack. For Italy, the war in Greece was no longer about victory. It was about avoiding total collapse. And soon, Mussolini would have no choice but to call upon his German ally for salvation. By early 1941, it was clear that Italy could not win in Greece. Mussolini's armies had been bled and beaten, their morale shattered by months of retreat and stalemate. The Duce's pride had led them into a trap, and now he needed Hitler to pull him out. But for Hitler, Greece was not just about rescuing an ally. The Balkans were a critical crossroads. Germany needed secure access to Romanian oil and a stable southern flank before launching Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union. If Greece remained a battlefield, or worse, became a British stronghold, the entire strategy of the Reich would be at risk. In April 1941, German forces poured into the Balkans. They moved with speed and precision, the same blitzkrieg tactics that had crushed Poland and France. Against the Wehrmacht's tanks, aircraft, and seasoned divisions, the exhausted Greeks stood little chance. Still, they resisted. Soldiers who had fought through snow and starvation refused to lay down their arms easily. At Thermopylae, the same pass where Leonidas had once faced the Persians, Greek and Commonwealth troops made a desperate stand. History seemed to echo as once again, a small force tried to hold back an empire. But the outcome was different. Athens fell in late April. The Greek government fled to Crete, where one last defiant battle was fought. German paratroopers descended in the largest airborne invasion the world had ever seen, and after days of brutal fighting, Crete too was lost. The swastika now flew over the Acropolis. Mussolini had his conquest, but only because Hitler had delivered it. And in that moment, Italy's role in the Axis was sealed. No longer a partner, but a dependent, a junior ally living in the shadow of Nazi Germany. Though Greece fell beneath the Axis flag, its spirit did not. Even in defeat, the Greeks refused to surrender quietly. From the mountains to the islands, resistance movements sprang up, some armed, some secret, all determined to defy occupation. Partisans ambushed German patrols in the rugged countryside. Underground networks smuggled information to the Allies. Farmers hid soldiers and downed pilots in barns and caves. Ordinary citizens risked everything: imprisonment, torture, execution, to keep alive the dream of freedom. The cost was terrible. Entire villages were burned in reprisals. Thousands were executed for aiding resistance fighters. Hunger stalked the cities, with famine claiming countless lives. Yet the defiance continued. For every act of repression, another act of rebellion followed. The legacy of Ochi lived on. What began as a single word of refusal on that October morning became a rallying cry for years of resistance. Even after the Germans withdrew, even after liberation, Greeks remembered those dark years not only for their suffering, but for their courage. On the world stage, the consequences were profound. Hitler's diversion into the Balkans delayed the invasion of the Soviet Union. Whether that delay changed the course of the war remains debated, but one fact is clear. Greece forced the Axis to bleed resources, time, and men it could not spare. The war in Greece was not the largest campaign of World War II, nor the most famous, but it was proof that even small nations, when united by pride and determination, could stand against empires. The story of Greece was not just one of defeat or occupation. It was one of resilience, and in the echoes of resistance, we hear still the defiant voice of a people who, when asked to bow, simply answered no. The Greco-Italian War began as Mussolini's gamble for glory. Instead, it became a testament to how courage, unity, and sacrifice can defy even the strongest of enemies. Against the odds, Greece not only stopped an invasion, but struck back, leaving an indelible mark on the history of World War II. It reminds us that wars are not only fought by armies, but by nations, by farmers carrying supplies through blizzards, by families enduring hunger, by soldiers who refused to yield even when outnumbered and outgunned. History often remembers the grand battles of giants, but here it was the determination of the small that echoed loudest. Greece may have fallen, but its defiance inspired millions across occupied Europe. If you found this story as powerful as we did, don't forget to like this video, leave us a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more cinematic histories brought to life. Press the bell icon so you never miss our next deep dive into the past. This has been your journey through the mountains of fire, the courage of ordinary people, and the single word that defined a nation: Ochi.